Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Creative Confidence Podcast. I'm your host, Mina Seetharaman. Have you ever launched a major change initiative only to watch your team slowly revert to the old ways? You get agreement in the room, but the new behaviors never stick, as if the very structure of your organization is forcing everyone back into familiar, clunky, and siloed habits. Our guest argues that the idea itself often isn't the problem. It's the powerful yet invisible patterns that underpin how your organization actually works. Today, I'm welcoming Clay Parker-Jones. He's the Director of Organizational Design and Development at Airbnb and the author of the new book, Hidden Patterns, a playbook for more human workplaces. Clay has spent decades leading organizational change, helping leaders understand how power, decisions, and team dynamics shape their culture. In this conversation, we explore how to intentionally design the systems that shape our teams by focusing entirely on organizational agility, the critical ability to adapt as things happen, seize new opportunities, and stop losing ground to competitors. If you're struggling to make a change stick or simply want to understand the invisible dynamics that determine whether your team will succeed, this episode is for you. To go deeper, explore IDEO's online courses in leadership and innovation, and be sure to subscribe to the Creative Confidence Podcast for more conversations with leaders who are shaping how we work and create. All right, let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Clay Parker-Jones. So our guest today is Clay Parker-Jones, Director of Org Design and Development at Airbnb and author of the new book, Hidden Patterns. I have it right here, a playbook for more human workplaces. I'm going to try and hold it up to the camera. Clearly, I've been in there. It's like a very IDEO thing to have a million stick notes in there. Thanks for joining us today, Clay.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Very excited.
This is going to be a great conversation because it's a lot of things that I personally care about a lot. My husband and I, he picked up a copy of the book and we were chatting about it too. I love how the book explores the invisible patterns that shape our work and whether or not some of our ideas will be successful, the kind of power dynamics and decision-making and team dynamics. You have so much experience. I talked about your Airbnb experience currently, but you've led strategy and been a chief strategy officer. So you've seen this kind of work in action, I think, many, many times. I think would love to hear a little bit about how you came to write this book. Because I just think that whether you're leading a team right now or whether you're shaping a strategy, whether you realize it or not, you're being affected by the things that are talked about in this book.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm glad it's led to some interesting discourse for you.
Yeah.
Back in 2013, this was at Undercurrent at the time, for those of you who remember that company. We were working on a bunch of interesting client projects, one of which was a big mobile-focused strategy project with a gigantic hospitality company. And I remember pitching our idea to the CMO, and he pulled out this gigantic binder of, decks basically from consulting companies that had come through his office, and it kind of like thudded onto the table. He opened it up and he pointed to the exact same thing that we had been pitching, and I was kind of deflated, but also I started to realize that it wasn't the ideas that were the interesting thing. It was actually the systems that were underpinning all of it that needed to change. And through our work at Undercurrent, we started to dig in more and more into what felt like the invisible architecture of work, the things that were driving us to prioritize the things that maybe the highest powered people in the room, but the people furthest from the detail and the data wanted us to do. And we just had this big question about, why does it keep being like this? What's standing in the way? So we kept breaking it down further, and we discovered these little patterns and practices. And I put that down for a long time, and then I recently picked it back up when I got this book deal, and basically just said, all right, how can I turn the things that we had discovered through decades of work and practice that other people had identified initially, and turn that into a system that more people could apply and bring to their day-to-day?
Right. It is interesting. I remember that anecdote from the book about the big strategy binder with all the ideas. And two things really struck me in that. The first is that you're right, like this notion that, oh, the idea must be wrong because
Mm,
somebody else came up with it and it didn't work. And it's like, well, actually, maybe there's something else there, right? But I love that that spurred you to think about like what else is true here, that if both of us came up with this idea, there's clearly some merit to it, right? So
yeah.
what underpins it? Um, and I love that you kind of were collecting them all the way along, because I think that's sort of like the story of a career in many ways, right? Like you're doing all of these projects, you're experiencing these pain points with clients, you're seeing what's working and what's not working. Clearly, it reveals to you a series of patterns that probably do repeat on a regular basis, or that form combinations that are really interesting. That if you want one outcome, these other two things probably have to be true to enable that outcome.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of I guess one of the most interesting parts to me about even the process of developing the book.
Right.
It actually felt more like I was writing software than writing a traditional business book, because it's not
Right.
like a story that you read from beginning to end, but rather a bunch of things that could be composed into each other. So if you
Right.
take something gigantic that everybody wants in their work or says that they want in their work, like psychological safety,
Right.
how do you actually do that? Well, you need to figure out how to meet differently. You need to figure out how to be more transparent and what to be transparent about. You need to write different things down and communicate in different ways. Maybe even the physical space has a role to play in the development and maintenance of psychological safety for the individual employees and for the system at large. And that kind of like interplay between, okay, you get to the end of the idea, like, okay, I believe that psychological or structural safety is a good idea, or that consent and consensus is a good way to make decisions. Well, what do I do next? Well, you
Right.
can skip to another page in the book and find something to actually do that might be a little bit more practical that brings that to life.
Actually, let's dive into that a little bit because I think that the way you've organized the book is really interesting. And you have a few ways of organizing the patterns, right? Let's talk about those. The first is sort of this like a top down approach, right? The patterns kind of their relative scale.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the top, there's foundational things, things about how we deal with or how we deal with power or how authority is distributed through the system. And those are interesting, conceptually interesting, but they're more mindset shifts or their outcomes. They're things that are harder to change. So I think of them as quite large patterns that you would maybe build up to or decide are important to you and break down. The next section under that, just slightly smaller, are the structuring patterns. So if we have some foundations for our organized effort toward a mission that we care about, toward a real purpose, how do we break that work down into constituent parts that work well together, or work increasingly well together? And there are some clear ideologies in that, not just hierarchies, but maybe many hierarchies, maybe networks of teams, maybe a different way of thinking about how teams are developed or designed. Beneath that, and this is maybe my favorite section of the book, is the direction pattern. So instead of thinking about strategy and structure the way that many org design books and maybe many org design thinkers have thought about it, maybe the structure is there, the foundations are there, and what people need are direction setting patterns, ways to determine if they're moving toward the right thing. So those might be ways of making decisions, ways of measuring. Yeah, like digging into, again, the active practice of setting and maintaining direction for a team of people. Beneath that, practice patterns. So what is the day-to-day life? What's the day-to-day work of a team that is now trying to achieve this maybe more human way of working? Beneath that, learning patterns that help us understand if the direction and the practice are yielding the kinds of things that we want them to yield. And then beneath that, the space, which on one hand might be gigantic patterns if you're an architect, but maybe for someone living in or working in an office rather, or working from home even, working from a digital space, might be some of the easiest things for us to change because they're amount to moving a desk around or rethinking the way that we structure our digital workspace.
I feel like that one's really, a lot of people sort of dismiss it because it's like, oh, it's just your office space, just work around
Mm,
it. But actually, um, it made me think a lot about prospect theory and loss aversion. Like if you've ever had to try and move somebody away from a window,
mm,
the way with which they will like out of my cold dead hands kind of cling to that desk, right? Because the perception of loss of sunlight or status or whatever's associated with that is really interesting, even if it makes more sense for their day-to-day work environment to be closer to a different team that maybe isn't near the window. If it feels like I'm speaking from experience, I am.
yes.
And I had
Yeah.
to really think about like, how do I balance those things so that people actually feel the sense of gain they will get from the work that they're doing and being closer to the teams they actually have to collaborate with, as opposed to cling to the sense of loss they might feel from not sitting close to a window. Like, I just think it's really interesting how space plays a role.
I totally understand that that is real for a lot of people. And if you wanted to, say, move away from having leadership offices or even not assigning desks, um, doing that actually requires big shifts elsewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like our relationship to power actually needs to change. It's not the office thing. That is actually one of the easier things to change. It's the perception, it's the belief, it's the connection to identity. And we have to have something, some sort of enabling structure between, okay, we're getting rid of offices for individuals and um, we're changing our reference point for who's in charge and what my value is within the organization or what value is societally, which feels increasingly fraught today.
Right, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about this notion of stakeholder goals, which is another
Yeah,
way in which you can kind of navigate the book.
yeah, yeah. So that was kind of a latter edition that emerged through the publishing process. So sitting down with my editors, they basically got to the point where it was long enough that it was a book and getting to the point that it was a little bit too long. And it was either figure out a way to, maybe this is divulging too much detail about the process, but it's a fascinating process. Figure out a way to like not have an index
Right.
or cut the entire space section. I was like, all right, we're keeping the space section in. And I have another idea that I'd like to propose, and that's instead of doing an index for finding specific concepts, instead let's provide an alternative organizational method for the book that is focused on the things that these patterns actually achieve. And
Right.
that idea from the editor actually led to this, I think, maybe even more interesting organizational principle because leaders, not always, not all leaders, but leaders typically don't come in and say, I'm really looking for um, a culture that actively steers. They don't
Right.
say, oh, I really want my team to be better at backlog management. And maybe they do in some cases, but not frequently to me, in my experience. But they do say, I need my company to be more agile. I do need my company to be more engaged as a culture. I need my company to be more innovative, to actually deliver in a to execute with more quality or to have more strategic clarity about what we're trying to do. Those are things that I've actually heard executives ask us for through the process. So there's basically those five additional ways of organizing the book in the back. And again, they're organized in terms of the biggest picture stuff at the top and the smallest picture stuff, or maybe the most easy to change but still fraught things at the bottom, the larger number patterns. And you can either start from the bottom with the more easy things to adjust, like whiteboards at intersections, or just make sure that everything is movable within your office space, actually on casters perhaps. And then you can work up from there to the more the deeper things like the structuring or the foundations.
That's really interesting. I so we talked actually previously about how the approach to the different ways into the patterns reminds me a little bit of like my favorite cookbook is How to Cook Everything by Mark Bittman, because you
Mm,
can go in and you can pick a recipe. So I want, like I have a particular stakeholder goal. Here are the patterns that are related to that stakeholder goal. I can go in and I want to make a specific kind of pork chop. I can do that. But also I just kind of want to know how to make pork chops. And
yeah.
so in that book, if I want to make, I can learn flavor profiles that help me to kind of create something slightly different, but using sort of a couple of same base level ingredients. And so the way that these things come together in different combinations sort of reminds me a little bit of those flavor profiles in many ways. I would imagine that some of our listeners are thinking, well, I'm not a CEO or I'm not an executive. Like, are there ways that I can apply this at my team level? Like, how can I be thinking about these patterns, even if I'm not sort of driving it from a top down perspective?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've along with many of the people that I've worked with in the past, the folks at August, a company that I helped found in 2015. So, folks like Erica Selden, Micah Rouse, Karina Mangu Ward, who has a new book coming out soon as well, Teams That Meet the Moment, which is, I think, very similar to this book, but takes in a different direction. We always used to say, work inside of your own sphere of control. So if you're a team lead, do the things that you can do as a team lead to bring some of these ideas to life. Figure out a way to look at your team as if team or a process that you own as a product. So try to imagine it like it's a thing that can be iterated on. Get user feedback on your product, your team, and make iterations to the structure, make iterations to the roles, make iterations to the outputs or the outcomes that you're delivering, and start there. That's pattern number 63. And it's a place that you can go to start and find other ways in to applying these patterns to your particular team. As an individual, I think a lot of the practice driven patterns or the learning patterns, I think about like team, like a logbook for all the decisions that you're making. I recently
Right.
read that one of the core practices at Anthropic for leaders, and this would be applicable for an individual contributor or a senior leader in an organization equally, is that they're required to basically think in public and write down the things that are confusing them, write down the things that are exciting them, write down the decisions that they're making, the work that they're putting out, so that others and other agents, let's say, can consume that information and get smarter along the way, which requires a different, again, attitude toward observability and what it means to be a participant in the system. But things that you can do individually involve typically the stuff in the practice section. Things that you'll want to apply as a team leader might be in like the direction section. You don't need to touch the structural stuff. You don't need to touch the foundational stuff. You can kind of open the book to the middle and start from there.
Right. That's great. I want to return to stakeholder goals because I
Yeah,
actually think this is a really interesting way of approaching the book. And I wanted to start with agility because I think that on the podcast this year, we've actually been talking a lot about uncertainty pretty much with every guest who's been on the
yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
I can't imagine why. And part of managing that is actually kind of increasing your ability to be adaptable, to be more agile in many senses of the word. I was wondering, when you think about organizational agility, how do you think about that and what you find the benefits of it are?
Yeah. Um, I think of it as an organization's ability to sense and respond to stimulus
Mm,
faster than the rate of change of their environment. So it inherently a responsive idea, inherently perhaps a reactive idea, and I think that's probably true for the world that we're in today, is that we're in a bit of a reactive mode to see what the technology can do, to see what competitors are going to do, to see what the world around us is going to enable or disable for us. Um, and that rate of input and adaptation and change is what I think of when I think of agility. So yes, a team that maybe is able to shift their focus to a new thing that's more important than the thing that was previously deemed as like the top priority. But also the ability of an organization to see itself as moldable to the environment and the structures that maybe allow it to or prevent it from adjusting to the things that they learn.
So let's go a little deeper here. I think I'd like to stay on this particular
Yeah.
stakeholder goal. And let's talk about some of the patterns underneath it. One that you outline is expanded available power. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and this pattern relies on some research that Alfred Chandler did, kind of the godfather of understanding the structure of industrial era organizations, let's say. And what he identified was that there was this split between the strategic and the tactical, or the entrepreneurial and the operational, where the people at the top of the organization were making big picture bets about where the organization would go many, many years from now, or where a market would go. And because we were kind of, or the firms of the time were kind of inventing those markets, they often had this quite, I imagine, satisfying feeling of like that working, right? Being able to invent a market, go into it, um, capitalize upon it, and extract value from it. And then the people below that, like entrepreneurial operational line, were the people who just did the things that were part of the plan. So all of the power effectively was isolated to the top. And I think we still have a kind of core assumption that that is the case. So whenever a team is asked to apply like uppercase A Agile or Scrum or something like that, they come against this idea that like the power is somewhere else. The power is
Right.
up at the top in the rafters, let's say. So the idea here is that you need to figure out a way to expand that power, and that means probably for the most senior leaders in the organization, carving out some of the power that they have and explicitly vesting it in something else, in a constitution, in a team, in a layer in the organization that gets a certain amount of power that then the executives cede, and they say that we are no longer going to take advantage of that power. You have it now. And in so doing, you expand the available amount of power for everybody to use, and that could cascade all the way down into the organization.
Right. Uh, it's interesting because I see the difference really markedly in between um, organizations where that power is so centralized and concentrated. We'll call it
Mm,
above the line. It's not the right term. That's an advertising term, but just for shorthand.
sure.
And people just sort of doing the work below the line. And one of the things that I think is then in a moment of giant change, the organization's just not ready.
Yeah.
Like you end up with the whole hiring profile is wrong. You've hired 80% of the people you've hired are actually about preserving the status quo. They're not ready to pivot and take on the kind of autonomy and responsibility that goes with it. And I feel like that's where you start to see these companies that have done very well in a very specific environment for so long really start to struggle with that level of change as they try to move forward into a really new kind of era of either uncertainty or like a complete pivot, for example, in their industry. It's super interesting to watch sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. That absolutely resonates with me and is a pattern that we are seeing in organizations that are able to resolve the permission problem that
Yeah.
gets in the way of people actually doing the things that they know are right for the organization or for themselves or for their customers. And I think organizations that solve that, and the only way to solve that is by getting clear on it, right? Like writing
Mm-hmm.
down where the power is,
Yeah.
writing down where power needs to go. And we talk about empowerment. We probably should think of that as a little bit more zero sum than we do today, which is to say, when we empower one group, we need to take power away from where it already exists
Right.
and give it to those people that need it. And if we could start by like mapping where the power is, where decisions are being made and what kinds of power tend to reconcentrate themselves, let's say. And that can be in the form of like an escalation to leadership. That's an indicator to me that we have not done a good enough job of expanding our available power for more people to make more good decisions on behalf of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Um, when are there a couple of things that people or that you typically recommend to try as shifts in this arena when people want to start to explore how to expand that power structure?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I would tend to jump to it's a little bit of a structural answer, but if we're talking about a foundational pattern like expanded available power, I would jump to probably some patterns around a network of teams or toward increasingly self-managed teams, and think about ways that I can try as a leadership team to vest some of the power that we have as leaders into a network. And it doesn't need to be a comprehensive network that covers every single person working everywhere in the organization, but it could be a smaller network, maybe a section or a network of people who are all working on a particular customer group or have a particular kind of goal, and work with those leaders to identify those teams, to make sure that you as leaders are giving them the power to make those decisions that they need to make. But I would jump from expand all available power to something where I'm vesting that power in some other structure rather than just saying like, oh, go forth, you are empowered, which
Right,
tends to be like, okay, cool, sounds good, but I recognize that I don't have it.
right.
You could also jump from there down into like a team charter. So making sure that you're writing down where that power is going, in some sort of durable artifact, some document, that explains what teams are allowed to do what things.
Right. Really giving them, going from the conceptual to giving them the structure to be able to execute on it is really
Yeah,
key, it sounds like.
absolutely.
Let's talk about another pattern in the agility space, which is dissolvability. Can you describe this pattern and what problems it seeks to address?
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's another both mindset driven thing and practical thing. It's in the again the foundations section of the book. So a pretty big idea that everything in your organization should be thought of as having some kind of expiration date, or that it is inherently impermanent. And you see this in some corporate or organizational cultures where leaders will emphasize that 100% certainty is a fantasy, or that we are always changing and that we expect to be always improving, and that the state we're in today is worse than the one that we are, going to get to over time. Like we are transiting through change rather than celebrating where we are today. And practically, that manifests in teams that understand that their mission may one day be completed and they might dissolve as a team. They might not come together anymore. The office that they're in might not be the one that they're in forever, right?
Right.
It is something that is liable to change and intended to change as part of the basic, again, foundation of the organization. And having that level of dissolvability, belief that things are going to change and that they will change and that they will, um, over time improve, even as you might lose something in that exchange. We're actually able to, again, continue to adjust. We can stay agile to the environment around us. We can add new teams, remove teams, reconstitute our work, maybe even stop working on something that was a previously valuable product to all of us at a moment's notice because everything is assumed to be dissolvable.
Right. Um, I really like this one. Because I feel like we become really rigid, right? Like we
Yeah.
think, oh, I have a North Star and I'm going to follow the path to that North Star. And a phrase that I used to use with a lot of teams is that the map is not the territory,
Mm.
right? Like I kind of know where I want to go. I don't actually know if there's a swamp in my way and I might have to deviate a little bit, or if we're going to have to put our backpacks down and hike and then figure out how we're going to eat on the other side. I have to kind of be ready for almost anything, especially at a time when things are uncertain or I'm navigating a problem I've never seen before. And what you're describing to me gives people the freedom to think like, oh, I know my skills are valuable. I know I can be useful. The way I apply them might just change over time, and that's not bad. Change doesn't have to be bad.
Yeah, yeah. And when you put it that way, it strikes me that this is something that's very normal for us in
Yeah.
our lives, but very abnormal for us at work.
Yeah.
And that is real and something that I think we would all be better off if we applied this idea of dissolvability to more things at work. But it's kind of contingent on a few things in the working environment. Um, if you're going to like carve out a portion of your organization and sell it to like at the top level of the organization, so not something that like an individual could do. But if you imagine a carve out and a dispossession of a portion of the company, you would need to have systems that allowed those things to actually be separated. So you need to
Right.
have a little bit more independence, loose coupling of teams, of systems, of organizations that allows you to actually split things up and decide that you're going to do something different. And that would be a different way of investing in technology. That would be a different way of investing in human capital. That would mean a different way of, again, thinking about like the basics of the company and thinking of it as like more modular, more cellular, rather than something that is like, oh, it's the rigid hierarchy. It will be always what it is forever.
Right. Um, I'm just making a note here. I really like this concept and want to think about it a little bit later today, actually.
Sure.
Um, so you had mentioned earlier this idea of consent and consensus. And I'd like to explore that a little bit because I think it's actually really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about that one.
Yeah, yeah. And this is one that we uh, borrowed, that we learned about through the process um, of applying holacracy, the now kind of like much maligned management philosophy or organized operating model that was kind of popular in like the early teens, let's say.
Okay.
Um, and it was based on this idea of uh, sociocratic way of making decisions. This could probably go in the show notes. There's a lot to say here. But basically, this idea that there's two fundamental ways to make decisions. One is consensus, where everyone who's making the decision needs to believe that it's the best possible way forward, or like I actively support this decision. And consent is I have no objections to this decision. I see no reason why this thing will cause us harm in the next few weeks before we can actually figure out whether or not the decision was good. And on one hand, in the consensus world, we have to operate like politicians. We need to get everybody in on our decision. So you get the pre-meeting before the meeting, so you can make the decision before the meeting, so that that eventual meeting becomes just kind of comfortable theater for everybody involved. That's like the consensus world of getting everybody on side before the decision is made. And then the consensus or the consent world is more about again, trying to understand where the objections are. What's going to trip us up? Why is this a bad decision? Not how can I get you on side to get you to agree that this is a good decision.
Mhm.
So just framing that up for people that there are two ways of making decisions. One is consensus, and that's normal, and that's normal but not adapted to an agile world that we're trying to move toward. And the other is consent, and it's all about reasoned objections to a path forward. Setting that up for people, again, takes a while and requires some processes. It requires a structured way of making decisions. It requires an ability to hear from everybody. It requires more transparency. It requires lots of things. But if you're able to set up consent and consensus as a way of making decisions for the organization, you can get faster by focusing more on, okay, I can live with this decision versus this decision has to be perfect.
Right. Um, are there things that people can try if they wanted to sort of test out this pattern or start to take steps towards implementing it?
Yes. So even something that you can do, and this might be one of those like individual things that you can try without telling anybody, when you're making a decision with a team, it's your team or you're a member of that team, there are a few kind of like tricks that can get people to think more like scientists, think more like journalists trying to understand a decision versus trying to politic their way through a decision. And one of those is just writing a decision down on a piece of paper or in a Miro board or wherever you're working so that everyone can actually see the decision. This happens so
Hmm.
rarely in organizational life where we actually look at the decision together and we say, okay, that's the decision we're making. I like it this way. I don't like it that way. I have this problem with it. We're usually just doing that in like the verbal setting. We're not actually looking at the thing. We might be looking at a deck, but the decision is kind of like coded inside of there. Just writing that down really, really helps because then you can edit it in real time. Just
Hmm.
do that. The next thing is asking people if they have any reason why this decision will cause us harm, which sounds weird, but it's one of those verbal tricks that actually works quite well for getting people to think differently about how they're engaging with the decision. So, will this cause us harm? Okay, cool. What harm? Tell me more about that. Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's something that we can actually adapt to before we run into that grief. Cool, actually not a problem. Let's go try it. Those are some things that you can, again, just try in like the facilitative mode to get people thinking more like this. You don't need to tell them that you're doing a consent-driven decision-making process. You could
Right.
just write it down and ask people if they have objections and go from there. It might work. It might require other patterns to play with, but if it doesn't work, you have a path to go down to make it better, to make it easier.
I'm struck by two things actually strike me as you're talking about this. Consent and consensus, it sort of strikes me a little bit as being related to disagree and commit. So not everybody will always agree with a decision, and that's okay. But if we want to decide that this is how we want to move forward, I'm going to disagree. I'm going to voice the reasons why I'm disagreeing, but then I'm committing and I'm not going to thwart the decision. I'm not going to actively or even just sort of passively step back. Like I'm in. So I'm going to do the things because we voiced it all. We've made it public. We've done all the things that we need to make this visible and work through the issues. And now we're going to try and make it successful.
Yeah.
Um, the second thing I was thinking of is actually, I love this idea of writing it down and getting people to voice, like, could this harm us in some way? Because it's actually a much more human driven way of doing risk mitigation.
Yeah.
You know,
I
it
love
like
that.
it feels like that. It's like maybe you're going to surface something I haven't thought about, and we want to do that, right? There's nothing wrong with surfacing a risk. It doesn't make you a bad team member. It actually makes us comprehensive as a team.
Yeah, yeah. And this isn't a pattern unto itself, but like um, having like specific questions that you learn to ask through, like if you read the whole thing, there's a few phrases in there that you'll probably pick up along the way. Like safe to try is one of them. And those might stick with you. Those might become part of your language, like asking people to respond to a prompt might become part of your grammar as a team. And that changes people's relationship to information. Just that little prompt to say, will this cause us harm? Or do you have an objection? Invites them into the process in a way that's different than our normal ways of doing things, which everybody knows how to respond to. And this little kind of like weird phraseology that you can apply, I think sometimes can just get people to rethink how they're sitting in the moment with you. And again, just change the vibe of that session.
Yeah, and I like that idea of making them feel invited in as
Yeah.
opposed to like the Debbie Downer of the
Yeah.
meeting. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, let's talk a little bit about, you've mentioned it already, and I really do like this idea of the network of teams. So
Mm.
let's explore that pattern a little bit more and the problems it's designed to address.
Yeah. So this is one of the most exciting patterns that, or the thing that I turn to the most frequently. It's the thing that I hope for us as a working society is that more of us can be in more high quality teams, more of
Mhm.
our career. Many of us, hopefully, and the research says that few people are ever in a high performing team in their working career, which I hope is not true, but I think that might
Wow.
be true.
That's heartbreaking.
It is, but hopefully listeners to this podcast and everybody at IDEO has, I know for sure, for certain, has been part of a high performing team
Yeah.
once upon a time. Um, but I want that for more people. That looks like actually designing our systems to support teams as the fundamental unit of work. That's what this one is about. And if you were to say teams in our organization are the fundamental unit of work, okay, what does that mean for the management hierarchy?
Mhm.
Well, it probably means it needs to change. It probably means that it gets quite a bit flatter, that it's mostly maybe senior leaders and then a bunch of team leads and then the people that are working on that team. Maybe those teams have a representative, which is another pattern, team representation, something that actually allows a team not just to have leadership, but also to have a voice at the next level up. It would require a bunch of different mindset, structure, behavior, practice, space, patterns, changes to actually allow more teams to exist more of the time inside of an organization. Because in many organizations, what we see is people who are siloed. They are fractionalized. They're working on 10 different things. They have 6 different bosses. It's a real thing. And if
Yeah.
we were to emphasize teams as that unit, we would then imagine a network of those teams rather than a hierarchy of those teams. For the nerds out there, yes, I recognize that a hierarchy is a kind of network, but hopefully you catch my drift here. Those teams would be interoperating, they would be buying from each other, they would be selling things to each other, they might be even selling things to the outside market if they're normally thought of as like an internal team. This one is so exciting to me, and probably the hardest, if I could offer the hardest thing to pull off in the book, it might be this. Um, and I hope this, again, becomes more of a thing for more people.
It's interesting because one of the things that I think surfaces in the book a lot, but is particularly true about this one, is this is not a thing you can declare without any operational support. Like like, oh, we're all just in teams now. Like to your very point, there are so many other patterns that underlie this, and so many structural availabilities that have to happen for the teams. The network of teams I data work,
Mm.
dissolvability actually I feel like fits right
Yes.
in there too, right?
Yes.
And I think that I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, because I do think sometimes uh, having been in senior leadership, we'll say we do this now, and then everyone's like, okay, but I don't even really know what that means, and it doesn't really work in that way. It's just we've sort of foregone the execution piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I think part of that is if people were to declare that we are a network of teams now,
Mhm.
um, the concepts that we're dealing with immediately become very, very simple. Like it's just teams. There's no other complicated operating model that we're trying to figure out, like a matrix or a multi-dimensional geographic divisional functional matrix that comes together at 3 points in the middle to deliver value for a customer. We don't have to have any of that. We just have teams, but that means the other things become much, much more important. Having a clear purpose for a team, having a clear definition of who's on the team, having clear roles within that team, although that may change over time, having clear decision rights for that team. Those are the things that matter, right? Not the operating model as such, but making sure that we're actually able to identify what that team is going to go do, what its interfaces are with other teams around it, how it delivers value, and who's on it. These are the fundamental things, not the big picture operating model. So we've kind of traded something that was ambiguous or an abstraction of our existing operating model for something that's very, very tangible. It's a team with a charter, with people on it, with a mission, with a product and a service that it's delivering to other teams or to the outside market. And that's the operational stuff that is, again, hard because there's so many more teams and there's so many more things to think about. But again, is those are like the foundations or the principles or like the primitives that make up a great team environment, a great work environment for human people.
Yeah. And I can see why you're excited about it, because in the book you talk about some of the benefits that it can make individuals and teams like much more resilient because they're comfortable reconfiguring around new projects or new ways of working. One that sort of resonates, I think, with a lot of IDEOers is this idea that you can really respond to customer needs without having to go through a lot of bureaucracy. Like that feels like so beautiful to most people at IDEO, I would imagine. Um, and the information flow, right? Like I think
Yeah.
a lot of times it's much more of a lateral or processing information flow than that sort of like hierarchy. I have to go tell my boss who will go tell another boss who will go then tell the person who actually does the work. Like it's much more
Hmm.
streamlined and um, I mean, really, it is agile in the best way.
Yes. This is what that would look like. We would no longer have this idea of an entrepreneurial and operational division, right?
Yeah,
Entrepreneurship is baked into the team. When you think about an IDEO team that's working
yeah,
with its customers and not having to go up to the senior most partners in the organization to make a decision about what's right for their customer, that's entrepreneurship
yeah,
and its operations together in one place, finally. And this is one of those operating models, one of those patterns that I think was uh, desired by lots of people for a long time, but has increasingly over the last several months become more viable, like practically speaking, because some of that coordination burden that would come with having, imagine thousands of teams within an organization or even hundreds, that would be a lot of overhead to think about, a lot to manage. But now technology can help us with some of that,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And just the need to move more quickly. I think it's a
Yes.
necessity is the mother of invention kind of play that we're seeing happening.
Smaller is
Um,
better for that. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about active steering. So
Yeah.
same idea. I'd love to just sort of explore the pattern and then talk about the value of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I borrow some stuff from Alex Osterwalder and a few other folks that have been thinking about better ways for companies and organizations to deliver value. So this is really about how an organization steers toward better outcomes, and decides that it will have more frequent occasions for setting, uh, acting upon, and appraising their progress toward a goal that they have. And for, again, this is supported, we'll keep coming back to this, I guess, supported by the entrepreneurial operational split. If you're going to make big entrepreneurial decisions at the top of the organization, then everybody else is going to follow your plan. That plan better be right, right? Like we have to have a good idea that
Yeah,
something is going to happen in the market, on our behalf. But if we recognize that things are going to change quite quickly, then we need to figure out a way that we make smaller bets, that we create a prototype, which is normal for everybody at IDEO, I know, and a lot of people I'm sure that are listening, but very abnormal in most corporate or large organizational, even
yeah,
mid-sized organizational settings. Prototyping to learn is hard. It is also a way to actively steer. It's a way
yeah,
for us to iterate. It's a way for us to get something into the market to learn whether or not that was a good decision relating to consent and consensus, having more data, having more chances to steer the wheel than we have today. So that's the idea behind active steering, and you could do that through experimentation. You could do that through, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a second, iterative shipping. It could come through many different ways. The rhythms and rituals of the organization could change, but just the idea that we are going to try to steer this not just annually, not just quarterly, not just monthly. Maybe we're going to steer it weekly or every couple of weeks.
yeah,
It's a new idea.
yeah. I chuckled when I was reading that part of the book because the subtitle is "You wouldn't steer a ship annually," right? I mean, you could try, but it wouldn't go well for you.
You
And
wouldn't, no one would do that. And again, very normal in day-to-day life. Like
mhm,
we would never do that. You don't like budget annually and then hope that at the end of the year everything worked out. You pay attention. You pay
yeah,
attention to signal. You adjust.
but it is really amazing. Like I've been at organizations that have said, we want you to take an agile approach in product development, but the budgeting cycle still happened on an annual basis. And I had no ability to move any of that around. So in the end, the product cycle became annual again, right?
Yes.
Which meant that
Yes.
you were just losing ground to competitors.
Yeah. or you did the shadow thing. Sorry to cut you off,
No,
but you did
no, no.
the shadow thing of maintaining some slack in your budget so that you can adjust, which means that you didn't deploy that budget on a big bet that you had in the beginning of the year
Yeah.
because you had to keep it for later. But what if
Yeah.
that bet was the thing, you know?
Right. Absolutely. It's like you were sitting on my shoulder in that exact meeting. So let's talk about iterative shipping.
Yeah.
And how, like, what that pattern is, how it's best used to solve problems.
Yeah, this one's had lots of lots of names, and iterative shipping felt like the one that best captured the ethos, while leaving some room for people to apply it the way that they wanted to apply it. But originally, the idea here was teams should ship weekly. They should iterate on whatever their work product is on a weekly basis. And if they set that rhythm for themselves, then they will continue to get better week on week. And you could ship, you could deliver to your customers on it might be internal stakeholders, or you could deliver to your customers that might be actual external customers, clients, um, or even in a retail setting. This is possible at the largest possible scale. You know, Zara does a great job of this. So on an iterative, frequent basis, making adjustments to your path forward, again, whether that's knowledge work or physical work, regularly, so that you make progress, so that you can actively steer. We've decided we'll iterate our budget on a more frequent basis. We've decided that we'll decide on a more frequent basis. Okay, let's deliver on a more frequent basis. And you could just do that, or you could apply active steering, or you could also go a little bit further down in and see your team or your process as a product and iteratively ship on that. But basically, just get new product out into the world on a regular, frequent basis.
Right. Yeah. Is there a way to do that? I was thinking as you were talking, all of those pieces make sense. But to your point about starting small, I almost think you could think about it like concentric circles. Like, what's the smallest piece of that I could do? And then once that's working, I can go one level out from there. So I could start with um I don't know, like taking, instead of doing like monthly things, like turning it into like let's actually create an output every week on our team, whether the whole world sees it or not. We'll see it, right? And
Yes.
we at one place where I worked, we used to just keep stick notes up on our desks that said "F it, ship it." Like just
Yes.
to remind
Yes.
us that that was the goal, right? Not like tweaking it at the edges. And then from there, once we got to weekly, we could try something else, like, and maybe we would push that out so that more people could see it and more of the org could get involved in it. But it's just struck me that you could start small and then sort of build out to include more patterns and more of the organization as a result.
Yes. Yes. That is where we have traditionally started with teams. And the
Mm-hmm.
pushback that I've gotten as a outsider, or even just as somebody alongside a team, is they'll feel when you start small, and this isn't true for everybody, but is quite common. So there's another path if you run into this problem. The team will start to feel, okay, we're just doing small things. We don't have a big vision.
Right,
Um,
right.
Alternative to that, then, there's other alternatives in the book, but one of my favorites is to start with the biggest possible change that would solve this problem. Start gigantic, something that would
Mm,
actually require the entire organization to change in ways that are probably bad or probably feel impossible, or would be so fractious that you could never even consider it. But write that down on the right-hand side of a whiteboard and then go back from that. That idea is the biggest possible thing you could do. Okay, what's something that would only require like half that amount of change or half of the organization or our basic operating principles or things like that to be adjusted? Write that down in the middle. And then on the left, write down something that you could actually go try tomorrow with no changes whatsoever. And now you've created, especially if you brainstorm on that, have a bunch of options, you've created a path. You've created a thing that you can go do right away, a thing that you can do that is maybe conditional on a bunch of other things changing. Maybe you could map those. And then you'd
mhm.
actually know where you're headed. Maybe you'll never get there, but that doesn't really matter. The idea is that you have a big picture ambition you have a radical idea and you have a small experiment.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually really exciting. And we not that long ago had our lead futurist on a podcast. And this is similar to a way that she will sometimes work with clients where it's like envision a preferred future. And then we
Yes.
backcast from there. And what are three things you could do this year that get you a little bit closer toward that preferred future? It is sort of that idea. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, that you can take something that's daunting and then break it down into smaller parts so suddenly like a tiny piece of it is really achievable. I love that.
Love it.
Um, okay, so we're going to do a quick recap because then we're going to
Cool.
go into our lightning round. So prepare yourself for the lightning round. Um, okay, so honestly, I probably have about 5 pages of notes,
Okay, good.
and so I'm going to hope that I actually capture at least a few of the amazing nuggets of gold that you have shared with us today. So as your book suggests, the title of the book suggests, the way we work is shaped by these invisible patterns, how decisions get made, how power flows, and how teams are structured. And that those patterns can be intentionally designed, not just accepted. We talked a lot about the stakeholder goal of agility today, which I really enjoyed. And it really comes from designing for change, treating teams, roles, and plans as temporary, making decisions at the right level, and organizing work as connected networks rather than just rigid hierarchies. That was one of my favorites, actually. I feel like I want to go back and think about the network of teams concept in many ways. Um, then, if you wanted to create change, we just talked about this, you can start small. You can pick one point of friction and test a new pattern and build momentum from there. Or conversely, you could start with the biggest thing that you don't think you could possibly have an impact on, and then work your way backwards into the small thing that you do think you could take on. And then finally, focus on what matters most to the organization, whether that's agility or innovation or strategic clarity. Start with the patterns that support that goal rather than trying to take on everything at once. And I think that's actually key, right? It's sort of, I think one of the things I very much enjoyed from the book is that it gave me a way to make big things seem manageable, and gave me insight into it's not that everything's not working. It's actually this one thing gives
Mm.
me insight into why something didn't work. It might not be the idea, it might be the pattern that underpins it that helps us to that prevents us from breaking out of the mold and making something successful. Um, if any of this seems interesting to you, I really cannot. I mean, clearly, look at all the stick notes, right? I can't recommend the book enough. My husband and I are actually going to spend some time this weekend talking about some stuff that he's read in it too. And we work at very different organizations, but it really is just so applicable in so many ways. So thank you for this. I just think it's really excellent.
Oh, thank you, Mina. That means the world to me. Um, as a first-time author and someone who's never experienced something like this before, it is so cool to hear that it's resonant for people. And I hope, again, if also if you have any feedback, if you have any thoughts, if things don't work for you, I would love to hear that and love to make this better for everybody. So, thank you for that.
It's actually one of the things I enjoy, which is like don't follow this exactly like a recipe book. Like read it, understand the guidelines, and then figure out what does and doesn't work for you. Like it's not prescriptive in that way, but it's super insightful. And I think, I've we've all read uh um business books that could have been an essay, like
Yeah,
candidly, right? Like
yeah,
it's like
yeah.
somebody told them to stretch this into like the Charles Dickens kind of you're getting paid by the word moment. And this is not one of those. This is like something that you will return to again and again. Like I have thought about nothing but this book this week. I keep thinking, oh, that's a pattern for sure. And I have to go
Oh,
back and revisit it. So I really, this is, it's been actually a really kind of edifying experience. I'm adding it kind of to my toolbox of things that I
oh,
use as a leader. So thank you a lot. It,
of
it
course,
really is great. All right,
of
we're going
course.
to do the lightning round because people don't want to hear about me anymore. They want to hear about you.
Okay.
So these are 7 questions we like to end all the episodes with. Sort of reminds me of the whole Bernard Pivot, l'apostrophe, but probably less highfalutin. So here we go.
Okay.
Um, What book, TV show, or movie would you recommend to our listeners?
Um, I have to be honest right now, the TV show that I'm thinking most about is Bravo's Summer House, um, which is what it is. But actually, I have more highfalutin answer to that, which is Bree Groff's. Hopefully, this is visible. Today Was
Yeah,
Fun. This is a book after the same ideas, and I'm so happy that we're starting to have like a new, like a bookshelf of new thinkers that are pushing
nice.
the world forward in their own way. Bree's book is it's so good. It's so fun and it's so beautiful. Like,
It,
what an incredible design. So
yeah,
yeah,
I'm a big font lover, so a cover like that really speaks to me.
so good.
Who is a creative thinker you look up to?
Two creative thinkers that I look up to. One is Aaron Dignan, author of Brave New Work, former boss of mine. He was always an incredible partner to me and never made me feel like I was subordinate, even though I am nowhere near his intellectual equal. And then another one is an ex-IDEOer, Ian Roberts, my current
I know
boss
Ian.
at Airbnb. He also feels like one of the best partners that I've ever had in work. And the people that I look up to are the people that I actually get to spend time with, which is so, I don't know, feels good.
Yeah, you can't put a price on that, honestly.
No.
What skill are you currently working on?
Saying no. I have such a struggle with this. I have had such a struggle with this, and it's even worse now that AI can help me do and see more. And figuring out a way to say no to things is something I'm going to have to keep working on.
Well, if you figure out how to do it, can you let me know because I'm terrible at
Happily,
it. Yeah,
happily.
it's been a week. What's a skill you're proud of?
Um, I think I would say cooking. Your point about um, understanding the basics of cooking so that you can cook many, many different things based on the foundational elements of a recipe rather than like following something specific. I was thinking specifically of salt, fat, acid, heat as a reference point for this book too when I was building it. So yeah, cooking. I love to cook. I think I'm pretty good
Nice.
at it.
That's I could use a lesson. I'm good at following recipes, but not much else.
Okay.
What's a mistake that you've learned from?
I think thinking that everything is broken about our current working systems and wanting to like burn it all down and start again. That just hasn't worked, doesn't seem to be working. And I want to figure out a way that we can actually make, I don't want to say incremental change, but where we can like stitch together things that make things a lot better for a lot more, a lot quicker.
Yeah, that's a hard one because every time I've started at a new job, I've felt like that.
Yeah.
Um, but it is sort of a what's the valuable foundation we can build on and where can we take it to somewhere greater?
Yes.
It's hard, but you're right. It's the right way to go. What's a philosophy that you live by?
Everybody is capable of so much.
Mm,
Um, I really believe that. And it is hard to stick by that some days, but it is my default way of thinking and seeing the world around me.
nice. And this is a question we end every episode with. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Uh, Stick by your beliefs.
Mm,
You know, even if you realize that the system, there's some good in the system, and maybe you were wrong about that, what you believe are the right things. So keep pushing for them.
excellent. Thank you for being with us today. And I would like to invite our audience, if they enjoyed today's conversation, to remember to subscribe to the Creative Confidence Podcast wherever they listen, to check out the IDEO course, Designing Strategy, because it actually covers some of the concepts that Clay and I discussed today about how to go beyond just articulating your strategic possibilities to surface what would have to be true for the strategy to succeed. And as always, you can find the recap of this conversation and all of our other creative confidence discussions at our blog at ideou.com/blog. Thanks for joining us again, Clay. This was awesome.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And to all of our listeners, we look forward to seeing you again next time on Creative Confidence.